Hi guys, it's James Layton here. Today I'm going to talk to you about flexible dieting, the if it fits your macros approach. And I really want to give, I know this is quite a hot topic, and I really want to give my thoughts and opinions, and I think there's been a lot of aspects about this that's been blown way out of proportion. So I think the problem is just a complete misunderstanding of what flexible dieting, if it fits your macros, is. I'm going to try and go into as much detail as possible, but first I just want to maybe counteract a couple of arguments against if it fits your macros. So there is a presumption out there in the fitness industry that basically people who follow this method, which essentially stands for if it fits into your macronutrients you can eat it, and therefore people have interpreted this as basically people just eating quote unquote rubbish, not clean food, or typically processed food, as much as that as possible to fit their numbers. And this is just completely ridiculous, and it's people misunderstanding the concept of this. And let me explain, okay. So people who properly follow flexible dieting, if it fits your macros, most of the time they have what's called a fibre target as well. So what does a fibre target enable you? A fibre target typically is going to come from single ingredient foods, things like fruits, vegetables, high quality single ingredient carbohydrates like oats, various other ones as well. So by having that target, by default, it's going to make it very difficult to consume a lot of your total calories from quote unquote non-processed food. Here's the second point. Basically, if you've got an individual who's dieting, typically their carbohydrates and their fat are going to be relatively low, especially a typical bodybuilder diet, which would be moderate to high carbohydrates, low fat, moderate protein. If their fat is pretty low, there's no way they're going to be able to consume a lot of fat from typically quote unquote bad foods. So you'd be amazed how much fat is in processed foods, things like biscuits, things like typically manufactured. There's so much fat in there. There's no way they're going to be able to consume that and then still fit the rest of the numbers. So that's where I think the biggest misinterpretations come from, is people completely missing the point. And there's quite a few other factors I want to talk about as well. I mean, there's also this mantra that because I'm eating 10 meals a day of just chicken and rice, that I'm better than you. I think there is some of that in the industry, unfortunately that's the case, but in my opinion, if there's a more efficient way to get there without having to stress over consuming large numbers of meals and just focusing on the boring foods, and if you can fit in a small amount of, say, quote unquote processed food that increases adherence, like I said, it's only going to be a small amount because it can depend on the individual. So for example, if we've got someone who's bulking who has quite a sufficient amount of carbohydrates, they might be able to fit in a little bit more processed food, but still they've still got that fibre target, they've still got that fruits and vegetable target. So it's still going to be all relative, and then for example the person really dieting now, getting leaner, their amount of processed food is really going to come down because say for instance you've got like a fitness model or bodybuilder prepping for a show, there's also that satiety, like these are people hungry all the time. Do you really think they're going to waste their calories on things that aren't satiating? Obviously not. So there's that other point to consider as well. I really think it all just comes down to, it depends again, it really depends on the individual, but I think it's just been blown way out of proportion, people completely missing the point. There's also a certain irony about this topic, and the biggest irony is the quote unquote clean eaters are often the people recommending cheat meals and cheat days where you can essentially go out and eat whatever you want. So these are things that aren't tracked, the cheat meals, the cheat days. So I find that quite ironic how they sort of bash the people that have a little bit of processed food as long as it fits in within their numbers, and they recommend cheat meals and cheat days that are not tracked. So you actually added up over the course of the week the amount of processed food from the person who's doing cheat days or cheat meals compared to the flexible dieter. Flexible dieter probably have less processed food in, so that's another thing you need to think about. But at the same token, if you generally don't like eating processed food, don't feel like you have to, if you generally do enjoy eating quote unquote clean food all the time, then that's great. But on the flip side, there's also an argument you could possibly pick up an eating disorder called orthorexia, which is an obsession with healthy quote unquote clean food. So there's a lot of angles to look at it. The final thing I want to talk about is this concept of context. I know I've discussed it before, and I just want to thank Alan Aragon, Lyle McDonald, a few other people I've learnt off. Is essentially it's very difficult for you to say whether an isolation food is good or bad without looking at the context and the composition of the whole diet. So for example, most people consider a slice of pizza bad. However, if we look at an individual and they're consuming one slice of pizza and the rest of the week they're consuming whole foods, single ingredient foods, and it's all tied in to fit their targets, protein, carbs, fats, they've got a fibre target, sufficient fruits and vegetables, how can we say that pizza's bad? And the same token goes for a quote unquote clean food. So for example, most people consider brown rice and chicken clean food. However, if that individual ignores energy balance, e.g. if their goal is fat loss, and they're still consuming more calories than they're exceeding, they're going to gain weight regardless of whether that food's considered clean or not. So something to consider. We've got an individual that has a slice of pizza once a week, but if that's factored into the rest of the whole diet, another person who consumes a chicken and rice meal but the consumption is far beyond what they actually require, that individual is going to gain weight. So that's something really to consider. Try get away from looking at foods in isolation and look at the composition of the whole diet. So I just think the whole thing's just been blown out of proportion. So I hope that really clears things up, and just keep thinking outside the box, etc. Keep thinking what is that individual saying in terms of his statement against flexible dieting, if it fits your macros. So I hope you found this informative. Please subscribe to my channel, please like, share, etc. on Facebook, Twitter. I'm trying to do as many videos as I can, try and really deliver lots of good content. So I really appreciate you watching. Thank you, have a great day.